Well, good morning, everyone. It looks like our participant logins are starting to level off. So I would like to welcome everybody to our first applicator training webinar prior to the 2026 season. My name is Chad Boondorf. I am a field marketing manager for Corteva. I live in southern Minnesota and have been with the organization for 23 years. Brad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Brad Allen, Market Development Specialist in Central Illinois. Live in Springfield, been with the company just a short 2 years now.
And I'm,
Scott,
thanks, Brad. I'm Scott Pringnitz. I'm also a market development specialist. I live in Southern Ohio and cover Ohio and Michigan. And I've been with the organization for 39 years.
So this just is to let you know this is the express written consent of the NFL. No broadcast or rebroadcast can be rep without the express written consent of the NFL and Corteva Agriscience. Kind of our agenda today is Brad will kick us off with a Enlist Weed Control System season recap and talk about the Enlist Weed Control System and traits. We will then pause, and if you notice on your screen, there is a Q&A session. If you have questions throughout session one or session two, please enter them in the Q&A, and we will pause at the end of session one and go through the questions with Brad and Scott. And then we will pause again. We will, at the end of session two, we will take time to go through your any questions that you have entered in the Q&A. One thing, just as a call out, make sure you use the Q&A section, not the chat feature through the webinar. And then after we get through session one, then Scott will lead us through the Enlist Weed Control System program approach and talk about some application considerations and go through label requirements for you. So with that, Brad, I'm going to turn it over to you to start session one.
great. Thanks, Chad. Got a lot of great information here, so gonna get hustling through this and get you on the way here. Just to do a quick recap here of the 2025 Enlist Weed Control System. Um, as we think about 2025 here at Corteva Agriscience, very proud of what we've been able to deliver with the Enlist Weed Control System for our customers. We're now on over 65% of the U.S. soybean market. That's quite a tremendous, accomplishment when you look at that amount of acres out there. And if you look on the left-hand side, there's a lot of reasons why growers are reaching for that Enlist Weed Control System. Now, not only in soybeans, but as well as in corn and cotton. We're recognizing that the system has been out there for some time. There are other areas in the US where you may have other systems like the Extend system, and they may be more prevalent. With the recent events regarding registration or label restrictions, not having that over-the-top application opportunity, there may be some folks on the line that this is their first time utilizing the Enlist Weed Control System. So hopefully you find this informative and a little bit entertaining as well. All right. Now let's give you some other highlights here with the Enlist Weed Control System. Since we've launched this product in 2017, we sprayed over 150 million acres. That includes soybeans, corn, and cotton. This is our eighth consecutive year of market share gain, which shows a real testament to the yield potential, but also that more and more growers are reaching for that, Enlist Weed Control System. And as I said earlier, we're in over 65% trait penetration with E3 soybeans. We'll continue to see this percentage grow as we move into the 26 season and beyond. And not only are growers reaching for that Enlist soybean component for the yield, we also have a greater than 75% spray rate with Enlist herbicides, whether it's Enlist One or Enlist Dio. What this tells us is, they're wanting the technology and the traits for that great yield and for that weed control. And as we compare and contrast data, there's a clear difference between the dicamba technology and the Enlist weed control technology. And the last point that we're very proud of is the fact that all the components for the Enlist weed control system are based in America. This allows us to be a reliable supplier and meet the demands of our increased market share gain for our growers and customers. Now let's jump into that weed control system. So as we look at this here, excuse me, got a frog in my throat. Uh, as we look into this, let's jump into the system a little bit and provide some background information. What we have here is a timeline for the Enlist Weed Control System. You always hear us talk about a systems approach. Systems means different things to different people, but in this case, we're talking about utilizing the trait, a system for the herbicides, and a system for the Enlist Ahead stewardship component. I like to refer to Dr. Eric Schroeder's analogy of this being that three-legged stool. If you pull one of those legs out, the system would not have be reliable or have the longevity that provide you that control that you need on your farm. As you look at the timeline below, you'll see the different milestones of when we've reached either for traits or for herbicides. However, if you look down to the left there, pay particular attention to 2012. Corteva Agriscience knew that we had to have a very robust stewardship system in place to steward and increase the longevity needed for the Enlist Weed Control System. That's why we launched it first before any of the herbicides and before any of the traits. And we feel we've done a great job on the stewardship so far. So let's dive into more of that as we move through the presentation today. As a reminder, with the Enlist E3 soybeans, we have tolerance to 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. This gives you flexibility as an applicator and or a grower. We launched the Enlist E3 soybean since 2019, and our neighbors are starting to ramp up here for the 2026 launch. You'll see we have over 120 seed organizations that offer Enlist E3 soybeans. What this means is you'll be able to work with your local retailer, local seed dealers, and local genetics that are adapted for your area, regardless of the geography you're in. And you'll be able to work with the Enlist Weed Control Systems approach. As you think about some of the other things we do, we offer multiple outreach opportunities. Whether it's training in the field with applicators or webinars like we're on today, we want to ensure that customers understand how to utilize the technology to get the best outcomes possible. I'm going to show you a few pictures here, kind of give you an idea how the program looks on the different approved crops. First, we're going to look at Enlist Duo. This is our premix of 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate. On the left, you'll see Enlist Duo at the 1x rate, providing very robust tolerance. And then on the right, you'll see Enlist Duo at the 2x rate, mimicking those overlap residuals you may see in the field. You'll see a little bit of leaf edge burn, which is not uncommon when you think about you get those 2 and 3x rates out there that might happen, as well as some of the tank combinations we spray, you get the adjuvants and such. But this is very cosmetic in nature, and so really, no concerns there. Now we move into the launch of Enlist Corn. So with that launch, you may have seen it early in 2017, 2018 growing season. Enlist is it provides tolerances similar to the Enlist E3 soybeans. Now you have the tolerance to 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. But we also add FOP tolerance, which falls under that Assure brand name, bringing that selective grass control. A unique characteristic of the Enlist corn is that we bring a lot of flexibility to herbicide tolerance. This has been a game changer, especially since we've seen some competitor products move away from certain traits, which may restrict what you're able to use on corn. And as I stated earlier, we planting, way back in that 2018 timeframe, the challenge was we had to have that that refuge that's structured. And as you know from dealing with, if you're of age like me, dealing with that from the insect traits when those first came out, it could be a challenge, maybe a little bit of a hassle. Had a little bit lower adoption rates. With the relaunch of Enlist Corn, specifically PowerCore Enlist, which is our above ground traits for insect protection, PowerCore Ultra Enlist, which is the same insect traits in PowerCore Enlist plus the VIP trait, and our below and above ground 4-seed Enlist, all have 3 of the refuge built into them. So this brings back that convenience factor, and it helps us to have a broader adoption of the trait and of the genetics that are out there. So one thing I want to mention is with the Enlist soybeans and at times with the Enlist cotton, you may see some of that droop of the petioles or the leaves during the hot and rapid growing conditions. With corn, it's a grass or a monocot crop, so you don't typically see that effect. But you may see some occasional leaning of the plants because this is a metabolized base trait. The plant has to actually metabolize down that 2,4-D choline. So for about 24, 48 hours, you may see a little bit of a lean, but that plant will absolutely straighten back up. It's very subtle, versus the other crops, so it may not be as pronounced, but we really wanted you to understand that that is a possibility as we go into the 2026 growing season. With Enlist cotton, we offer the same tolerances that we see with Enlist E3 soybeans. That would be 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. And when you think about the challenges that our southern U.S. growers face, it's not uncommon for us to utilize all three of those herbicides due to that glyphosate tolerance that we're challenged with, as well as some of these weed species that are really become hard to kill and resistant. So we've seen a very rapid adoption of the phytogen brands and that W3FE trait, which is our insect trait packaged with those herbicide tolerances. Again, bringing a lot of flexibility, bringing choices in the herbicides with this trait tolerance from the Enlist soybean system, or with the Enlist system. All right, to give you a little bit better visual here on the cotton side, this was sprayed with Enlist Duo, which is again 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate on Enlist cotton. And we're comparing it against XtendiMax plus Roundup Power Max on Xtend cotton. Unfortunately for 2026, we don't have any over-the-top solutions currently for the Xtend crops. This has become a big differentiator for us. And as you'll see here, between the different cropping systems, we have similar crop response as well, whether it's the Enlist trait or it's the Xtend trait. Now, I want to review the two main packages that we have as it relates to Enlist herbicides. On the right, you'll see our Enlist 1, which again is our straight goods 2,4-D choline, which offers a greater taint mix flexibility with glyphosate or glufosinate. Now, the majority of the U.S., about that 95%, is going to grab that in Enlist 1 because it has that greater taint mix flexibility, more options for taint mixing, and most importantly, it's giving that flexibility to customize taint mixes at the field level. And while we have phased out the Enlist Duo, I wanted to bring it to your attention still because there's likely some still out in the marketplace. With Enlist Duo, one more time, it's a proprietary blend of 2,4-D choline and glyphosate. Now, glyphosate still has some utility in many areas, and Enlist Duo is a very easy and convenient blend that allows the grower to have two effective modes of action, especially for that burn down situation or in season. And regardless of whether you're going for Enlist 1 or Enlist Duo, it's those target weeds down at the bottom of the slide that are really the drivers on why growers are utilizing the Enlist herbicides. Now, when we talk about Enlist herbicides, they're 2,4-D based. But also there's a lot of technology built into Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo. First, it starts with our 2,4-D choline, which is inherently less volatile as compared to the amine or ester. 2,4-D amines and esters have been around for quite some time. In most row crop situations, they're utilized as that burn down application. They're also used in range and pasture for those that have that and been there for many years. One thing we recognize is that we typically don't utilize them for in-season applications. We knew when we developed Enlist 1 and Duo that we really had to have a formulation that would minimize volatility concerns, especially because of the ESA's or Endangered Species Act, and making sure that we had full flexibility and freedom for our customers to utilize these technologies. As you can see on the right-hand side, 2,4-D esters and amine, they can still have volatility even 70 hours after application versus a near zero volatility with 2,4-D choline. Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo have been through a lot of testing. Not only internal, but also university testing. It's been put through the paces in hot environments. It's been out in the heat, 140 degrees. It's been in the hoop houses. We put it next to sensitive crops such as tomatoes and cotton, and we just don't see that off-target movement due to the volatility. So that provides that peace of mind for you as a grower and an applicator. One of the other aspects of the wide adoption, the Enlist system is the direct benefits we're seeing from our Enlist herbicides. Here you can see the direct comparison of the BATMA dicamba, which is the salt, and Ingenia plus glyphosate. Back in 2024, that was a standard program, you're seeing out there. So what we did is we compared that with Enlist Duo, which again is that premix of 2,4-D choline plus glyphosate. So this is really an apples to apples comparison, and you'll see that we're 98% less volatile. And the reason I'm stressing this is because we have a ton of great applicators, talented applicators out there that do everything right. You're following the labels, you're reading the labels, we're making the right applications. But if that product gets up and move, it's beyond your control there. So that's the value prop that we bring with the 2,4-D choline. Also, you couple that with the Colex-D technology, which is the other component here, that's a reduction in that physical drift. Where if you match that up with herbicide and the nozzle together, we can get up to about 90% reduction in physical drift. So we're not only able to make that on-target application, but we can ensure that we stay put where that product needs to be. All right, switching gears a little bit here. At the end of the day, Enlist One and Enlist Duo are the only registered 2,4-D products that can be applied pre-emerge and post-emerge on Enlist crops. The reason we do that is for the longevity of the traits and the herbicides. We have a lot at stake when it comes to the freedom to operate. We currently don't have the ability for in-season applications of dicamba. And, while it's not our trait, we still want you as growers to have that flexibility and to have some tools in the toolbox. But, unfortunately, we don't have that right now. So by ensuring that we're using the right technologies, and in this case, we're talking about Enlist One and Enlist Duo over the top of Enlist crops, not only do you get the benefits from those formulations, but you're ensuring the technology is here for quite some time. All right, so let's move ahead with the Enlist Ahead and stewardship. When you think about proper stewardship, we think about management resources, education and training, and then those technology advancements there. So, we have our application guides. We have those product use guides. We have the Enlist app that's on your phone or on your iPad. Talking about that education and training. We talked about, doing some local training in the field with a retailer or maybe even a Corteva territory manager there. And also, we've got those technology advancements that are actually built into the weed control, Enlist Weed Control System. So let's get into some of the Enlist Ahead stewardship aspects here. First off, we reviewed the benefits of 2,4-D choline as far as near zero volatility. Also, I spoke about Colex-D technology that provides that 90% less drift than traditional formulations of 2,4-D. The other aspect of this and the Enlist herbicides is the EPA mandated testing of tank mix partners to make sure that they're going through the approved nozzles and we're not negatively affecting the drift pattern of Enlist One or Enlist Duo. So we talked about the volatility, the proposition on volatility, knowing that when you make an on-label application, hey, that wind may change on you. But the fact that the product doesn't move due to volatility, that's a huge benefit. You couple that with our know-how that we have within Corteva AgriScience. Enlist Duo and Enlist One were the first products to ever go through that enhanced ESA. Corteva has actually more products than any other company that have actually been through that ESA. So we'll continue to navigate those processes as we register some of our newer products that are out there and develop new actives. But in the end, we have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge to ensure that we bring good products to market that ensure that we do not have a negative impact on the endangered species. All right, one thing I'd like to introduce here, point out is, with any introduction of a trait with our growers, they'll sign that technical use agreement. And that's an agreement between Corteva AgriScience and that grower. It's required to access any seed technology or germplasm. And we continue to work, with our retailers that sell the products to make sure that we're properly steering that, making those good decisions, making good recommendations. And they're also working with the growers to make sure they know how to utilize the technology through online webinars like we're on today and those field days that we talked about. At the end of the day, there are some things that we need to consider. First and foremost, not following any pesticide label is illegal and can result in state and federal fines. As I stated earlier, Enlist One and Enlist Duo are the only approved 2,4-D containing products that can be applied over the top. The reason I bring this up is there are a lot of consequences that can occur or have ramifications if we're using a non-approved or unauthorized 2,4-D product. As an applicator or grower, if you're spraying that ester or that amine product to save a few dollars, it's your 100% your responsibility for any off-target movement or damage. And unfortunately, 99% of the time, your insurance company is not going to pick up that damage from an illegal application because it was a known illegal application. Now, at the same time, we do hear about some of these. So, that can force a grower to be placed on an unauthorized grower list, not allowing you to be able to utilize the technology. And that's something we don't like to do, but we know growers need as many tools in that toolbox as possible out there. The biggest thing is it really threatens our access to the technology for everyone. We know there's thousands and thousands of growers and applicators each and every day that do the right thing. They're doing the labels, they're doing the right rates, but with the Endangered Species Acts and other considerations that we have to do as a registrant, it really places further restrictions on us on that system just because of a few bad apples, and that impacts everybody in a negative way. It's really the reason why we take stewardship so seriously and why we reach out and try to find some of those bad actors if needed. But more importantly, if we're using illegal products, that doesn't allow us to put, reinvestment into our innovation. So whether it's the next seed, it's the next herbicide, the next seed treatment or trait technology, we want to have that dollars to invest back into the R&D. On average, Corteva spends about $4 million a day on R&D. That's the kind of investment that allows us to continue to farming, and moving forward in the future. So there's a lot of consequences that can occur by not utilizing proper herbicides over the top. As we talked about, there are some consequences. Don't want to belabor this a lot, but just want you to know some things that go on. In 2024, we created an anonymous tip line. Anybody can report anything that they believe is an illegal application or illegal seed use. This is truly an anonymous tip line. We don't know where the reports come from or who, but it allows us to, follow up on each and every one of them. This allows us to make some evaluations. Was there an illegal application? Was it really justification for it? Or was it just maybe we didn't understand what was going on at the time? All of those can be valid and true depending on the situation, but we do take each and every one of them seriously. So we also do random audits of customers. When you think about the US, it's such a huge growing area, different growing area. We have a lot of growers utilizing our technology. We want to ensure that we're doing those random audits to verify proper use. And at the end of the day, there's consequences for inappropriate promotion or illegal use, which may come up and could be reported to state or federal agencies. You could seek restitution. We could restrict grower access or restrict, the retailer to access to the Enlist herbicides. Unfortunately, that is the reality of the situation. In 2025, we've had to do all those. Don't like doing it, but again, it's about stewardship and protecting those traits out there. But for the thousands and thousands of growers that are and the applicators that are doing the right things, it's our responsibility as an organization to steward those properly so that way you've got as many tools as possible in your toolbox. All right, now we're going to move into the Enlist Weed Control Systems program approach. So when you get into the system, you'll hear us talk about a program approach. Whether it's corn, soybeans, or cotton, it's the same thought process in all three of the crops. First, we want to start off clean. Whether it's tillage, a burn down application, or depending on the crop, it may be even, those pre-emerge products that are in there. So we think about that and the residuals. We also want to ensure that we're utilizing multiple effective modes of action. When it comes to corn, we don't really have a ton of concerns there, but we have seen some resistance to glyphosate and to some HPPDs. But there's other technologies that are offering, that multiple effective modes of action, which is the key. So the way we approach the corn is a little bit different than how we do beans. We want multiple modes of action pre as well as multiple effective modes of action on that post with residuals, and we want that coupled with the Enlist one. So the reason I bring that up is I previously talked about soybeans. We have a greater than 65% market share with Enlist E3 soybeans. We know the growers are utilizing Enlist One and Enlist Duo more than 75% of the time on those acres. So, if we want to go into corn or cotton and remove those multiple modes of action products and then just rely, 100% on that Enlist One or Enlist Duo to do that heavy lifting, we're really just going to repeat the same mistakes that we've made in the past with herbicides. We have to break this cycle, folks. That's really the key there. So, with Enlist, where I see it having a fit is those growers that want to use dicamba. Those growers are reaching for that for weed control or for just another mode of action. Most of us may not be keen on spraying that product. We know that there's some potential off-target movement there. Also, I talked about the Enlist E3 market penetration there. You may have 6 or 7 of the fields around you could be Enlist, soybeans. So that can also be a challenge there. It makes sense. You bring that neighbor-friendly application of Enlist One and bolt it onto your post application just on the acres that you need it. I don't want you to spray Enlist One or Enlist Duo on every corn acre, nor does every corn acre need it. You still have to have the solid genetics, the insect protection, and other ways to maximize that yield. We're just giving you more choices to tackle those, challenges there in the Enlist weed control in corn. So moving into the soybean approach, very similar to corn. We want to start clean. We want to have those multiple modes of effective modes of action on the pre side, and I can't stress this enough. If we're not putting down multiple modes of action pre, that really limits us in what we can utilize in season as far as a residual. We just don't have the choices in the soybean program for post-emerge that give us those residuals. So in regard to Enlist One or Enlist Duo, we want those to be tank mixed with those multiple modes of action again. When it comes to Enlist One, for example, we can look at glufosinate or glyphosate. Then you bring in a product with like Inversa, which is our product of choice when you're thinking about that post-application with Enlist One. That is our encapsulated acetochlor. If you want to think about maybe, hey, I'm going to think about a esmetolochlor, we have that with EverPreX. So really what we're wanting you to do, ensure that we're trying to layer those residuals as well as thinking about that systems approach that we have. Same holds true with cotton as far as a program's approach. We know, there's a lot more than 1 or 2 applications that are made into cotton, but the principles stay the same. We want those overlapping residuals. We want those overlapping effective modes of action. Folks, at the end of the day, it all relates in how we manage the technology. Traits have never caused resistance or created it. It's poor herbicide management is what creates a resistance. And if we treat these technologies properly, they're going to be, utilized successfully, and we're going to minimize that opportunity for any type of resistance. So, moving on to BMPs for Enlist applications. I'm going to keep this really high level, folks, because actually there's another webinar out there. So I'm going to put a plug in for those folks on the BMPs. So please look at that. Please attend one of those sessions. So, these are really common sense, best management practices there on the left. But if we follow these, hey, we're going to have better weed control. It doesn't matter where you're at, but these are the ones, these are just those nice general, hey, best management practices for our products. So, when we applied for the registration or the re-registration in 2022, we went to one full labeled rate over the top. So as you see there on the right, it's 2 pints of Enlist One herbicide and 4.75 pints of Enlist Duo. The reason we have this is, you get out of the field, you've got a ton of different weed heights out there, and you have multiple flushes. So with going to one full rate, those weeds are seeing that whole product and the full rate out there, and we're gaining that control. We're keeping those flushes from coming up. So as we think about that, spraying those small weeds. So, it's all about the growing points when we talk about weed control. So if you're thinking about that 6-inch tall weed that's out there and you're using a product like a Contact, like a PPO or a Liberty, you have to get really good coverage. You have to get it across the whole plant, get all those growing points. As these weeds get bigger, it gets more difficult. So when those weeds are smaller and you're overlapping that in-season residual, you're minimizing also those future flushes that we talked about. Our driver weeds such as Palmer amaranth and water hemp, they can grow 1 to 5 inches in about 4 to 5 days. And with some of the operations that we have out there and the number of acres you guys are trying to cover, it's imperative that we start small so that hopefully we end up on time with that proper weed height and as far as perspective goes. So moving on to enlisttaintmix.com. This requirement is all about not negatively affecting the drift patterns. Let me repeat that. It's about not negatively affecting the drift patterns. In any of our products that you'll see on this website, they have not been tested for crop response. They have not been tested for taint mix compatibility. They're not an agronomic recommendation from Corteva Agriscience. They're not an endorsement of any type, nor are they an indicator of performance. They're just indicating that it does not negatively affect drift or have a negative impact on the physical movement of the particular product, whether it's Enlist One or Enlist Duo. All right, so how are we attacking these programs? So thinking about water hemp here, we've got 2 post-program, no residuals. We're only looking at those modes of action that are there. So with that, on the top line, the post one, it's either a glyphosate, Liberty, or a combination with Enlist One versus a second in-season application approximately 15 days later. If you look at what's on the best side for weed control there, it's the options with the combination of Enlist One and Liberty. It's around 91%. If you look at the others, Liberty alone, about 82%. Glyph plus Liberty was about 86. Really what we're trying to preach here is when you start off with those 2 modes of action, you can follow with a lot of scenarios. You have options. So, say you started off with Enlist One and glufosinate, and you have a little bit of grass. Well, hey, maybe on that second pass, I'm going to look at Enlist One and glyphosate. That should be your next application. Or if you have some broadleaves present in there and you maybe have some glyphosate resistant, maybe it's time to look at going with Enlist One and Liberty. Again, by using these effective modes of action on water hemp, we know we can get a lot better weed control. And it honestly gives you more flexibility. You always want to start strong, and it gives you more choices in that second pass. If we start with a weaker program, you're going to have to bring that hammer in on those second pass. And, we usually have mixed results when we get to that part of the equation. So, just want to make sure that we're really thinking about that, starting strong and finishing strong with that. So now we're going to move into my last part of the presentation here, sequential passes on Palmer amaranth. I know some of you are lucky or unlucky enough to have to deal with this product or this weed out there. There's very few one-pass programs on Palmer. It's almost impossible to try to control this with one pass. If you are, I'd love to hear some discussion. About the best you're going to do here, if you see from that first pass, is 75%. And again, if you look at it, it's Enlist One plus a taint mix partner in there, especially getting into that glufosinate part of it. 75% really not acceptable there. We got to figure out how to get a little bit more robust there. But when we move to that second pass there, you can see that we threw in those multiple modes of action again. That Enlist One and the glufosinate gotten up to that 95% control. Now, when you're talking about a key driver weed like Palmer amaranth, 95% may still not be the greatest. That's a little bit borderline on that Palmer. So if I look at that and I'm seeing that less, a little bit less control there, maybe what I need to do is go back and start looking at my pre-programs, as I talked about. We're looking at a systems approach here. So really, hey, what drove down the lower, control rates and what I need to do for that post pass. So again, it really comes down to that multiple modes of action, multiple passes there. So with that, I think we're going to hit our first Q&A session, maybe.
Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you for the updates on the Enlist Weed Control System and how important stewardship is for regulation globally and even within the US with the EPA. Thanks for the update and the importance around the Enlist Weed Control System. And I can't emphasize enough that we need to have a program approach for diversity. Weeds are adaptive. We've learned over time, whether it's insects or weed species, the importance of using a system approach when it comes to managing hard to control weeds. So currently at this time, we do not have any questions in
Oh,
our Q&A portion of the chat. So Brad, nice job. You got things covered.
excellent.
Oh, we have one that just came in.
Oh boy.
What is the best water pH for the Enlist weed control system?
Oh geez. Scott, you wanna help me out here on this one? Because yeah, I mean, oh gosh, we have such I cover Illinois, so we get from different water quality from one county to the next.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I can do that. Yeah, it's a very good question because
yeah,
I believe some of the other technologies out there have found that pH has impacted
packed it. Yeah.
their on target performance.
Mhm.
And fortunately, with Enlist, we have done some of the testing likewise on that, and we have it's really a broad pH
Broad
range.
range.
We're not considered, I mean, we're not concerned with where that falls, similar to some of the other technologies out there. So I would just apply some common sense. If you get
Yeah.
into extreme situations, those aren't favorable, not only possibly for Enlist, but for other technologies that would be in the tank at the same time. But we just haven't ran across an issue there. So yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate the question, and it's a favorable situation there for the
It's a
Enlist.
very favorable situation. Yeah, I wanted to get your opinion, Scott, because yeah, I mean we do face that and challenges, from different water quality standpoint. But haven't had any concerns yet there, and we are fortunate that we can run a broad range. So, Chad, it looks like another question came in.
Yep, we got a few more there.
Okay.
Is there a time of day and temperature critical for control with the Enlist weed control system?
Yeah, so we the NBS team jokes about this because I mean when glufosinate is the best, we may be on the opposite end of the spectrum there as far as weather patterns go. But again, ensuring that you've got the right weather conditions as far as daylight, sunlight, having that humidity, and just ensuring that, as again I talked about, we do have the fortunate ability to have that less volatility and less drift, but we need to ensure that we do have the right wind conditions as well. So.
Do we have a recommendation on what pre's are the safest on beans growing on low CEC soils?
Oh wow. That's a challenge there with us. We've introduced several new products here with Kyber Pro and with the Sonic Boom. That's Sonic Boom is sulfentrazone in the Metribuzin, and then getting into that Kyber Pro, you're getting into that sorry, flumioxazin, and I'm trying to do trade names to make it easier. Flumioxazin and Zidua and the Metribuzin in there. So, it's really working with your local retailer to ensure that we're getting the right product placed on the right acre there.
Do we recommend adding additional drift control products as well to an Enlist One tank mix?
Scott, what's your opinion on this? Because I know I have mine.
Yeah, we generally do not
We
recommend
do not.
adding them in. If you see them on
Yeah,
the approved list
yeah,
for
that's
at the enlisttankmix.com. That's because they have been tested and approved
Tested.
that they
Yeah.
do not adversely affect off-target movement.
Yeah.
But what concerns us at times when they're added is that it can complicate if you're putting a lot of things in the tank
Yeah.
at the same time. And essentially that technology is already built in to the
Yep.
Codex D technology on our products to help ensure on target performance with the Enlist brands.
There's a lot of
One
challenges there
just
because, oh, go ahead, Chad.
No, just one add on there. We don't recommend adding additional drift control products
Correct.
unless one of the tank mix products you are adding
Requires it.
requires an
Yep.
additional DRA for approval.
Yes. That's
So
exactly
we
what I was going to do.
have some drift reduction with the Colex D technology.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's what I was going to say. Again, it's got to be on the approved list there. And also, yeah, we don't recommend them unless it is, that tank mix partner in there that does require it. But we are fortunate with the Colex D formulation there, technology that we do have that reduced drift potential.
So we will come back to the Q&A again at the end of the
Yeah,
session, but
I
in
saw
the
one on
essence of
EMS.
time, thank you all for submitting. Please continue to submit. And then at the end of Scott's portion of the presentation, we will continue to go through the Q&A. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next part of our session.
All right. Well, thanks, Chad. I'll check the advance there. It's working out, so we're good to go. In this section of the webinar, we're going to talk about application considerations and label requirements of the Enlist Weed Control System. Specifically, we'll go into the approved nozzle and pressure range for optimum coverage. We'll discuss adjuvants and some considerations there. We'll compare susceptible crops in sensitive areas and why that might be a point of confusion at times. We'll look at spray versus no spray field scenarios, and we'll revisit the Endangered Species Act more specifically and how it impacts the Enlist Weed Control System. There's an Enlist herbicide application guide that's available. And when you reference that, it provides some broad guidelines for making successful Enlist applications. And what a lot of people don't think about is what you can do before spraying and the preparation that goes into it in terms of the timing. Again, it kind of references spraying weeds less than 6 inches tall there, as Brad had indicated. Well, that's a timing aspect, and it fits right into the program approach that Brad had talked about. And it's because weed height is actually a controllable, and that goes into pre-planning with your retailer in terms of what products might buy you additional time in making that application while staying on the application window that's highlighted there below for each of the crops. Soybeans going through R1, cotton before the first white bloom, and corn going up to V8 or 30 inches. The tank mix partners, that's part of the plan when you build that out ahead of time and you go to that website to verify, as Brad indicated, that they stay on target. We'll talk more about nozzles in a bit, but when you get into the application itself, the volume that you're applying becomes important in terms of that coverage and your predictability of control. What rate you're using, as Brad had indicated earlier, it kind of hits all the main points. Spray pressure is very important. And unlike some of the other technologies, we actually recommend going on the higher end of the pressure range to improve the performance. Because we're pretty confident with our technology and staying on target, we'd like to secure the performance. Boom height becomes important as well. And then there's other weather conditions in terms of spraying in the 3 to 10 mile an hour wind conditions that are ideal. We're trying to avoid that 0 to 3 miles an hour when temperature versions are more likely. And then, of course, we'll revisit the susceptible crops and where those are a concern. Clean out is always important in avoiding the contamination as you're switching between crops and trait technologies. So that becomes important as well. When we look at the nozzles, certainly in the essence of time, I'm not going to go through the specifics on this, but I do want to call out a number of things. One, we have hundreds of approved nozzles, and they are not all created equally. And so because of that, we've gone to this color-coded chart to help you navigate what nozzles you're possibly using now and whether there's room for improvement. So specifically, you'll notice the boxes highlighted on the left with the green, or I mean the orange. Those nozzles are specifically for pulse width modulation sprayers. There's actually some highlighted in the green boxes that are specific to the John Deere ExactApply. And then you'll notice these color charts here, the broad ones on the right of these documents. The green highlighted nozzles are ones that we feel the most comfortable with in essentially covering the balance between performance and on-target performance. So in some cases, you have a lot of flexibility with the Enlist products. And so you have an approved nozzle where you can use the TTI type nozzles that other programs embrace, but understand they're not the ones designed for optimum performance. And the other part of it is note the pressure ranges here. And that's where we were talking about going to the high end of the pressure range. Some of these nozzles specifically allow all the way almost to 100 PSI. We want you to use on the higher end of the pressure range because if you notice, some of them also allow you to go down to 15 and 20 pounds PSI. That, even though it's approved and it's flexible, it is not necessarily the range that would give you the best outcome for performance. So there's a lot of information that's on that guide. I'd encourage you to consult with your local retailer or your territory manager to kind of make a selection there that works best for you. When you look at the spray cards, if you will, and kind of the percent coverage, 10 gallons per acre, AIXRs, and I should have called that out on the previous slide. AIXRs are one of our best general purpose. The Greenleaf TDXLs, there's just some really solid general purpose nozzles that we go to a lot, not only for the Enlist technology, but for other tank mix partners. Because those products, if you look at this, if you look at 10 gallons per acre, what you see in the lower left are the percent of leaf area that would be covered with that scenario. So AIXRs can cover 20% of the area at 10 gallons per acre, whereas the ultra coarse type droplet to the right is far, far less. It's more than half. But if you think about that being your herbicide that you're buying and applying to your crop, it's really important that you're getting the best bang for your buck there. And that's where the nozzles come in and play such an important role. If you look at the 20 GPA and the AXRs, you see that's really an optimum scenario for you to maximize your performance. It's a great mix or great choice to maximize not only your weed control, but also stay on target. Whereas the ultra coarse, you might give up some of the performance in that situation. This is a picture of a close-up looking at if you were to avoid using adjuvants in your applications. The big thing here to pay attention to is with no adjuvant, the lower right-hand corner shows the magnification. So at 1,500 times, look how small that leaf area is for the droplet size. Some people refer to surfactants as spreaders. And what this shows is a close-up picture, and you drop it all the way back to 850 times using kind of a standard surfactant rate. And then down at the bottom, 1% COC or MSO, they drop that magnification even more. And additionally, those type adjuvants, we go to them a lot when we're trying to optimize performance because they also can be a penetrant, and that kind of demonstrates there a little bit on the leaf too, that it appears just slightly different when you zoom up on the leaf and what those adjuvants are doing. So now we're going to kind of talk about susceptible crops and how important they are. Since the first year, we launched in cotton first. And for any of you that are in the cotton area, you probably know cotton is a little sensitive to 2,4-D. There were spray restrictions in those areas with the previous 2,4-D formulations, and this came up right away when we launched. So you see it in bold red letters: do not spray when adjacent susceptible crops are downwind. And we're going to elaborate on that some because we found it was an area of confusion. So essentially, you look on the left there, and there are a number of susceptible crops that are listed. And the top of the list, not coincidentally, is non-enlist cotton, since it's high on the list. But you go down to some of the other crops, and for me personally, in Ohio, Michigan, grapes is probably one that we have in pockets that I've had the opportunity to look at for alleged off target. So when we look at this. In this situation, Enlist soybeans, if the wind's blowing toward one of those susceptible crops, it is a do not spray. It is not a case, and where we found that there's confusion is some people think, well, that's where that 30-foot buffer comes in. I can just leave a buffer strip and go ahead and make the application. And it is a black and white spray or do not spray. And this is not where the buffer applies. If the wind's blowing that direction, it's going to carry particles towards that susceptible crop, and you are likely to see crop effects, speaking from experience in that regard. It's really quite impressive how they can express when a little bit of the products get on those leaves. So in this case, it just kind of expands on it a little bit more. When you have the wind direction blowing away from those susceptible plants, as the top diagram shows, you don't even need the buffer strip there. As long as that wind is blowing clearly away, you can spray up to the field separation and make that application. But down on the diagram below, if it's blowing the other way, you got to park the sprayer or change your herbicide choices in that case. And again, it kind of highlights the main crops there that we're concerned with. So the great news about this, though, is that there are a lot of crops that are not susceptible to Enlist. And the top one on the left there's the key one for a lot of the growing area on this call, and that is soybeans. One of the competing technologies, it is not the case. And all of these crops, the reason why they're considered susceptible or not susceptible, if you make a direct application to non-enlist soybeans with 2,4-D, I think you all probably know what that outcome will be. There'll be dead plants, but it's a question of how much of those active ingredients these crops can tolerate. And believe it or not, soybeans can tolerate a fair amount of 2,4-D naturally, and that's why they're considered a compatible crop. So they do not specifically apply in this category in terms of do not spray. You see a number of other crops that are listed, depending on where you are geographically. The system does allow a lot of flexibility, fortunately, compared to some other choices in the market. So now if we move to the sensitive areas are, those buffers come into play as a requirement of the EPA. And what those are designed for to protect areas, I sometimes refer to it where the bees, birds, and butterflies live. It's where other species are more active, and that's in the wooded areas, pasture, sometimes ditches, lawns, or other non-crop areas. In that case, we're trying to protect habitat. And in that case, fortunately, the EPA allowed us to have it on our label where you could make that application even if the wind is blowing toward those areas. But in an abundance of precaution, the label requirement is that you allow a 30-foot buffer with the wind when the wind is blowing toward that area. You got to lay back 30 feet. So that is how that requirement works. And then we'll look at some of the specific applications in terms of real world scenarios on these diagrams. You've got a field of Enlist beans, trees to the north. If you notice the directional diagram to the right there, tomatoes in one direction, Enlist corn, and then Roundup Xtend 2 beans to the south. And in this case, if you've got the wind blowing north to south, It is um, it is blowing toward those soybeans. And in this case, can you spray Enlist herbicides? Yes, you can not only spray them, a buffer's not required because those non-traited, non-Enlist beans are not considered susceptible. So that's a real nice feature there. Um, the wind is blowing away from the sensitive area where the trees are, so no buffers needed on the north side of that. But there is a precaution where it is blowing parallel to tomatoes. That, as we know in the real world, the wind does not always just stay with one direction. And if it's shifting, I know I've had an opportunity to look at fields that had that situation where the wind was shifting. And what had happened is if it shifts, you're probably going to catch a corner of that field with some symptomology. So it's a precautionary thing. You would rather have it shifting away than toward that tomato field. So if we look at the same situation, opposite wind direction, it's blowing south to north. How would that change your application in this case? So with the wind blowing north, blowing toward the trees and the sensitive area, that's where you would lay back 30 feet. You could still make that application. The precaution on the tomatoes still remains where you would want to watch for shifting wind conditions there. Ideally, it would be blowing directly away from those tomatoes. So it is a case to watch out for in that particular situation. So now, same crops and fields. We got the wind blowing from the east to the west. If you look at the wind there, now this is where there's been confusion in the past with this division between those crops. That's where some people perceived, I can just lay back 30 feet and go ahead, but it is absolutely a do not spray. If that field is adjacent to the Enlist 3 soybeans, that's a case where you just need to park the sprayer or change your program. And that's a case where those residual treatments and plans and a program approach can really help you out even in this case. Why? Because it buys you more spraying days to wait for the more favorable conditions. So that's why that system approach is so important in terms of managing the technology in all these situations. So now I want to kind of elaborate a little bit on the Enlist herbicides and endangered species. This ESA that you're hearing more and more about, it was actually originating in 1973, and it is designed essentially to protect habitats and those endangered species. And there's different components of it, but specifically if you go to point 2 there at the bottom, um, that's where it involves the Enlist herbicides in terms of prohibiting um, it's actions that are likely to either jeopardize habitat or impacting the existence of these endangered species. Now, the great thing about this slide is you've only got some county restrictions there down in Florida and some other sub-county restrictions in a few other states in the South. So fortunately, it has been manageable, but you will see more herbicides impacted by this going forward. Also, there's runoff mitigation measure requirements. This is to prevent off-target movement. And again, in the essence of time, I won't go into a great amount of detail here, but there's a credit system. This is right off the label. And if you can, again, use a program approach, minimize the applications in crops, you'd get 4 credits. If you can minimize your tillage or use some grass waterways, you would get to the requirement of 6 credits in this space to try to manage the off-target movement. I refer you to the local resources to help manage this for your soil type in your area. And with that, on a summary basis, the Enlist Weed Control System is on the majority of acres and it continues to grow. We've got 2 herbicides that have been used successfully on the majority of those acres. So we've treated 150 million acres there. We see growers continuing to switch to the technology because of the flexibility, the performance on weed control, and the neighbor-friendly outcomes in terms of using the technology. And we have extreme confidence in the safety that the trait packages convey. There are a lot more resources available at enlist.com. That's where you can find a number of those references that we used in this presentation. And then there's a lot of literature that's available as well, some of which is available for downloads. So with that, questions and answers number two. We're right at 10 o'clock here, Chad. I don't know how you want to proceed with this, but
Thank you, Scott, for some good tips on right proper spray tips, right adjuvant usages, what crops we can spray next to, and what some of the guidelines are. For everyone on the call, we are up against time. If you need to end and hop off, that is totally understandable. But Scott and Brad and I will stick around and go through for a while for those that still have time available and go through and answer some more of the questions that have been submitted in the chat. So I will start off with the first question. It's around crop response. Have
Mhm.
we seen higher symptomology of wilting in higher situations? Do we have any guidance on limiting oil additive concentrations under these conditions?
Oh,
you want?
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take that one, Brad.
I was gonna say I got my opinion too.
Yeah, and please share. Um, Generally, yeah, you'll see that wilting response under hot, humid conditions more
Yeah,
frequently, and you'll even see it more if we have limited moisture conditions at the same time. It's essentially impacting that plant's ability, or it's that short window of time when that plant is metabolizing
yeah.
the herbicide active ingredients. So would we use that to impact, would we change our adjuvant recommendations in those situations? Not very often or not very substantially. When you're making a herbicide application, the primary thing you're after is weed control, and we don't want to back off of that too much. It does impact it in some cases, especially you start pushing temperature and humidity adding up to over 150. I mean, that's kind of a little bit of a cautionary time that you want to start considering whether there's changes in forecast, better situations, maybe some tweaks there, but generally we don't do anything real major. Brad, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was gonna say stay the course. I mean, uh, I use the phrase, and it gets me some rolling eyes. But if we're easy on the beans, we're easy on the weeds. We do get into some challenges if we're looking at some of these more oil-based products that are out there that we're adding in as far as a layered residual. But again, I'm still gonna stay the course and still want to really ensure that we're getting that good weed control. We're going to metabolize that product. The beans are going to handle it. We're going to keep growing. We're going to have great weed control. So just keep running with that.
Okay. I'm going to jump ahead to a couple additional slides we have. We have a question here on best mixing order and with Liberty and Enlist.
Yep.
Okay. So very good. What Chad brought
Yeah.
up here is one of the tank mix ordering sequence
That's
is specifically, or I think I said Brad, I meant Chad if I didn't say
that's
that.
okay.
But but the importance is primarily, I mean, these lists are important to help ensure that you have compatibility. And one of the key differences that comes up at times, whether you're mixing with glufosinate or Liberty branded products or glyphosate, is how
Mhm.
fast we all tend to move when we're mixing these. So there's a couple key ones there, and that is add water. 50% of the tank is one of the key things, and that has to do with dilution. What we really want to do is make sure these products are diluted in the process of adding. So one is how much you started with for water in the tank, and secondly, how much time it is between these additions. If you do run into any compatibility issues, there are steps that can be taken to reverse it if you're using the Liberty or glufosinate mixes. But with glyphosate, there is not a known reversing strategy there. So it's far better to take the time in both situations up front to make sure you're getting this diluted. We know for certain if you go too fast, and you're mixing it with glyphosate, you will have a problem and getting it
Yes.
out of your sprayer. It is a known predictable thing, and every time that's involved, it is generally a time factor and a dilution factor. So that's what we try to troubleshoot. These re
We
these resources here are available on the product use guide and certainly every label, so you can reference it there for the details and again consult your local folks to help in that regard.
we kind of covered this a little bit. This question actually came in prior to going through like spray tips, but we didn't
Mhm.
call out Liberty and Enlist specifically. What tips would you use, Scott or Brad, when it comes to when we're tank mixing Liberty and Enlist together?
Back to the slide. Yeah, there you go.
Brad, do you want to take it?
Well, I was going to go back to the slide, but
Very good.
nozzles are like opinions. Everybody's got one.
There you
There
go.
we go. Typically, in my part of the world, we stick pretty simple there and run those AIXRs. It's just a good all around nozzle for us, and we've had great control with that, or great deposition out there. So we try to keep it simple, stupid, and just run those AIXRs in my world. So
Yeah, and if you
I
get
think
into
that
if you get
go ahead,
into some of
Scott.
the exact apply situations, then of course
yes,
you get into, or I mean, I should say just PWM or the pulse width
PWM.
sensors.
Yeah,
Then you get into more specialized nozzle selection that are
yeah,
compatible with that as well. But we're still trying to do the same thing to prevent the ultra coarse droplets in that case,
yes,
and have the happy medium for coverage and
yeah.
control and on
It,
target.
it it's that misnomer. We do want we do want that higher pressure and ensuring that we're getting a good coverage in there. So yeah, it's a balancer.
Very good, thank you. Do we have, so one of the questions here is, and I wonder if they're talking different versions of liquids or dry, it doesn't call it out, but
Yeah.
what is the best water conditioner to use when tank mixing? AMS or a non-AMS water conditioner?
So Brad Allen's opinion is we're going, especially you're going in there with that glufosinate. I have my own postcard for best practices for Enlist, and the one thing I have on there is 3 pounds of AMS. So that's just kind of the standard for me in my world, and that's just what I like to use. We really you know really see that benefit there with that. You starting to get in to some of the chemistry, aspects of it. But yeah, the AMS is definitely where I want to concentrate.
Yeah, and if you're looking at it, and one to kind of keep it simple, we tend to lean on whether it be liquid or dry,
Yes.
AMS based products,
Yeah.
especially just because they're more universally they apply to the glufosinate mixes.
Phosphate. Yeah.
They glufosinate mixes essentially have to have an
Yes.
AMS based product, whether it be liquid or dry, and they benefit from having at least 2 pounds to the acre equivalent. You can get that from liquid mixes, but you
Mhm.
don't want to go to non-AMS water conditioners when you're spraying glufosinate.
Phosphate. Yeah.
Glufosinate or Liberty branded type products are our preferred mixing partner for general purpose weed control,
Yes.
especially on the broadleaves. That's why we tend to just go to the focus on the AMS containing water conditioners.
Yeah, it
And
really, I don't differentiate between the dry and the liquid. We understand you guys don't want to throw bags, and it's time consuming looking at that from the liquid side of it. So yeah, I saw that was one of the questions in there as well. So I perused them earlier, but yeah, that Brad Allen's opinion for Illinois is we recommend 3 pounds. If we're getting to two, that's where, we're okay there.
so I think the big call out there is use an AMS liquid, but make sure you're using a high enough rate of
Yeah.
your AMS liquid for that particular formulation to get to 3 pound equivalent of AMS in that scenario. Well, gentlemen, I think that pretty much covers most of our questions today. I want to thank Brad and Scott for their insights and information walking through the Enlist Weed Control System. I want to thank everyone for joining and sticking around for an extra 11 minutes with us on the call.
Thank you.
Hope everyone has a wonderful day. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional questions. Contact your retailer, work with your local territory managers, and we will have other additional. You were registered for this webinar. You will see we will have 2 more versions of this. Plus, we will have some best management practices around Enlist and the Enlist application system. So thanks everyone for your time today. And with that, we'll call it a wrap.